Well, hi everyone. It's Bronte Price from the Equality Network. I'm a cisgender gay man. And as you know by now, we run a series of these safe space chats with a variety of people talking about LGBTIQ plus issues. And today it's my deep honour to have as my guest Fran Webber. So welcome, Fran.
Thanks, Bronte.
And please just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what being a lesbian means to you.
You're asking me to say a little bit, and that for those who know me, know that that's sometimes hard with me. So interject at any stage, Bronte. I'm 57, full-time, well, not quite a full-time employee, but employed as a funeral director. I also study and am near the pointy end of my diploma of Auslan, Australian Sign Language. Identify as cisgender lesbian. Don't mind if you call me lesbian, gay, whatever. I think the term is probably whatever feels comfy for you, and the intention behind it, I think, is what matters. So if a friend, and indeed, Bronte, if you called me a dyke or referred to me as a dyke, that would be fine.
Wow.
It's about the, as I say, the intention behind.
Yeah.
So I'd probably usually say I'm gay, but I have no problem with being called a lesbian or whatever. So,
thank you. And do you want to give a plug for your company? Who do you work for?
Yeah, I work for Tobin Brothers Funerals, which is a Melbourne-based company.
Yep.
I've been with them since 1995. And very happily so. I think they're a fantastic company, very professional, good to their clients, good to their employees. But I love my job as a funeral director, and it's a big part of my life, really.
That's a long time being with the same company for
it is
role. Yeah,
it is. I can't imagine working for anybody else in that industry, and I love working in the funeral industry. I think I've been very lucky to find a job that is incredibly satisfying and fulfilling. So,
and have they always been embracing of your sexuality?
Yes. Oh, they've been fantastic. I found out after I'd been there for a few years that the main person who interviewed me had actually heard from somebody, in Melbourne. Sometimes it's a small place. Oh, so-and-so, such and such, she's a lesbian. And that was never raised, was never an issue. And I've also always felt very comfortable being out at work. Work Christmas party, I bring my partner. You're invited along with your partner, and it's just never been an issue. I'm sure that there have been individuals who are, less than great about it, but that's their problem, not mine. Certainly from top senior management down, it's always been absolutely fine, which is great.
And underpinned by respect, obviously, which is fantastic.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's just a part of who I am, and it's not usually relevant unless somebody brings up and says, "Oh, I really want a lesbian funeral director." In which case they say, "Yeah, we have such a beast," and can refer people to me quite happily. So, or even if we have a situation where the person who's died, we know that the partner is so and so who is same gender. Well, if it's convenient to do so, then myself or one of the other gay staff can attend to that family.
Yeah.
And for a long, long time now, I've been the only lesbian there. But we do have quite a few gay guys who are colleagues of mine, which is really beaut. And certainly networking things that I've done before and been involved in for work have been absolutely fine.
It's a great offering.
In name and in money, fundraising thing many years ago. That was a Cup Eve thing, sure, go here. What do we need to pay? So, as I say, from the very top down, it's always been just fine. In a company that is seen by many as the Catholic funeral company,
Yeah.
Catholic Funeral Directors.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a conservative industry, with that extra layer of having a fairly large base of Catholic clients.
Yes.
And it's still been okay.
Yeah, great.
Which is good and encouraging.
Yeah.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about Fran coming out as a lesbian, presumably some time ago. How was that for you? Tell us your coming out story.
It was a process. It was a long process. I grew up in a country town in South Australia and lived in said country town till I was 15. My parents, our dad died 7 years ago. Mum's still alive. My parents were always very, very strong, committed, involved Christians, not Catholic, Protestant, but very much that was what informed their life, their decisions, their moves, their adopting of my 3 adopted siblings. Everything that's been minor and certainly everything that's been major in their life was informed by what do we think is the Lord's will in our lives.
Okay.
And I grew up with that as life. I was going to church on Sundays. When I was older, I was going Sunday morning, Sunday evening. I was going to Bible studies. I was involved with the Christian fellowship group at school. Everything. I played netball for the church netball team once we moved to Melbourne. And when I grew up in that small country town, I say small, population about 5,000 when we lived there. One of everything, one high school, one primary school, one of each of the varieties of churches, one main street, one, the best beach in town, all of that, so that you knew everybody your same age, definitely, and often their brothers and sisters, older and younger, often their parents. And people who knew me knew that my dad was a lecturer at the local theological college, and knew that mum, probably at that stage too, I think, was an RI or RE or whatever we call it these days, the religious instruction teacher, which of course was and still is not religious instruction, but Christian instruction.
Yeah.
So I grew up till age 15 in this situation where also it was, through the 70s, I suppose, was my growing up. I was born at the end of 64. So my growing up time was in an era which might seem quite different for those of the younger generation, where we didn't have positive role models of anything in the LGBTIQA, or as it was then, gays and lesbians, or probably puffs and lesbians or lesos or dykes or whatever. There were no positive role models. The role models that you had were the occasional news report or something like that. And it always seemed to be that the people who were spokespeople were the people who kind of had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So everybody can tell I'm a dyke because I'm this, butch, whatever, dyke. So I might as well be a spokesperson. Or the gay guys who were quite camp and very obviously gay would be the spokespeople. So you had this reinforcement of what the stereotype was. And so I grew up with that combination of small town 1970s Australia, combined with the very Christian upbringing, which was that homosexuality was something that was a sin.
Of course.
And I grew up thinking that a lesbian was most definitely 4 things: butch, ugly, hairy, and man-hating.
Wow.
And the stereotypes, the people that I saw who I could go, oh, there is a lesbian, fit into that stereotype and reinforce that stereotype. And for young people now, you kind of go, what? like my gaydar's just shot. I can't pick gay people for love nor money half the time because it's just people. But back then it was very much that. And the only person who I ever knew was a lesbian was the PE teacher at school. And dear Ms. I will not name her, good woman, lovely PE teacher, but certainly fit most of those stereotypes. She wasn't ugly, but she certainly was not feminine in her presentation. And she was not a man hater, but she was a very strong feminist. And I wish I'd known her when I was a bit older, or 10 years later 20 years later in the scheme of things. But yeah, everything just reinforced that. So it never entered my mind that I could perhaps be a lesbian. I mean, not in a million years. And so it was only, that's a very long preamble, it was only when some years after leaving that town and moving to Melbourne with family because of a job change for Dad. So I was 15 when we moved here. And a few years later, I somewhat naively and accidentally found myself in a relationship with a woman. Or kind of something happened and it was like, oh, hell. And both of us were the next day somewhat discombobulated, I guess is the word I'd use now, because, we were best friends and something happened and it was unexpected, I think, for both of us. I'm sure for both of us. And then we had to kind of go, we've got to talk about this. We continued in a relationship for well over 2 years. It was completely secret. Nobody knew, not our friends, not family, not anybody. It was just us. We were besties. We moved into a flat together. That was fine. Very much set up as a 2-person flat.
Flatmates.
Now I look back and I just think, why? We both assumed, coming from a similar background and a similar level of naivety in the early 80s, assuming that each of us would go on to get married to a man and have kids, because that's what you do. The very concept of being able to be in a long-term committed, monogamous or whatever, but for our way of thinking, that type of relationship with another woman just wasn't even a possibility. It just was not on the radar. So when eventually that relationship ended, because she left me for a man, and is still very happily married to that man with a couple of kids, so good on her. But I only then came out to my mum and said I was bisexual, because that was the only thing I could kind of conceive of. And I certainly hadn't come out to myself really particularly as anything before then. We never read a gay book, saw a gay movie, went to a gay club, nothing. It was us in our relationship, in our very insular situation. And then there was the real world. So it was only at that point that I then started, I suppose, thinking about things and broadening my horizons and looking back on some interactions I'd had where I had met somebody who I then kind of thought, oh, I think they're a gay woman, and oh, maybe that's why I had a connection with them. Maybe that's why I liked them as a person.
Yes.
And finally went to a gay club.
Wow. Yes.
the blinkers just came off and the head exploded and the horizons were suddenly, from here to infinite. And I still wasn't sure of things. It was a very tumultuous time for me in my poor little brain. And then I went, condensed version, then I quit my job and moved to London, and I very much then connected with the gay and lesbian scene. And back in ye old days of 1987, when I landed there and subsequently spent a year there was a fantastic lesbian discussion group, which was a weekly group at the London Lesbian and Gay Centre.
Wow.
Oh, like, I wish I could go back in time and thank them and whoever ever set that up and all the people ever involved. And because if I thought my horizons had been open before, it was just completely and utterly changed my perspective and expectations and ideas of what could happen. And I only then, having also kind of jumped back into trying a bit of straight life occasionally for a minute, and going, not what I want. Thanks anyway. But also was meeting people who identified as lesbians and who were in long-term, or, that young time, long-term, like 2 or 3 years, relationships, a woman and a woman in a long-term relationship, living a life just like normal. And I, for the first time, saw that as a possibility, and then kind of realized that if I had to label myself, well then, actually I'm a lesbian. I'm not bisexual, I'm a lesbian. And so I spoke to my poor parents about that, and said, and probably saying to them was part of saying to myself, okay, this is what I am. And so from there, there was easy, I suppose. I was in a different country making new friends. My friendship base was based around that group. And from the very first time I went on a Wednesday night, I had somewhere to go that weekend. I had people to meet up with at different venues, and there the scene was such that, unlike Melbourne, that had in those days, one lesbian only club and one night once or whatever at pennies at the Prince of Wales. For those of the similar vintage who may remember that, in the era of pennies and pokies and all of that, somewhere where there were so many different gay, mixed gay or lesbian specific nights and events and venues for a whole range of interests and styles and whatever, including a friend I had who was a DJ, who was ethnically an Indian woman, who ran a club called Asia, which had a heap of Indian and other subcontinental women that would come and be able to have that mixture of their lesbian sexuality, but also with their cultural identity. And the dancing there, suffice to say, was very different from what it was at the clubs I'd usually go to, but just that amazing broad sphere. And so then when I came back, it was to a Melbourne where I was then in a different job and started gradually, I suppose, to be more open about my sexuality. Not initially at work, because I kept, I suppose, work separate from my private life, but eventually to a point where coming out was as simple as, so you're married? Oh no, I've got a partner, her name, blah blah blah, and it just not being a thing, although it is a thing because you just have to constantly go against the assumption of heterosexuality.
That's right. But it was also at a time when to be homosexual, so to speak, was illegal. It was a criminal offence.
It certainly was for men. Yeah. As my understanding for anywhere that I've ever lived has been that it's not for women because, well, the way I always read it was that Queen Victoria couldn't possibly imagine that such a thing would happen, so therefore we wouldn't need to outlaw it. But yeah, it was young people watching this, if there are any. My God, it was different. I mean, as I say, I'm 57. I'm not that ancient, but the changes in attitudes and acceptance, it's still not perfect, but my goodness, just the realization that some people are, having gone from working places where even though I wasn't trying to hide things, you almost need to kind of go slap, slap, slap. Hello, I'm a lesbian. My partner is a woman, because it just wasn't in people's field of vision. If it was in their field of vision, they'd get it. But if it just didn't occur to them as an option, and especially when I had longer hair and long hair and a ponytail, and it just didn't enter people's field of possibilities. And yes, there was still that the illegality for our gay brothers, but just the whole, even if it wasn't, and when it wasn't illegal, it was still, less accepted, or it was immoral, or it was.
That's right. Or you were medically a freak. There was something wrong with you, as well as the sinner at church, whatever church you went to.
Absolutely.
One of the things that that never leaves you, but we don't think about very often, is the euphoria of walking into your first gay or lesbian club and thinking everyone here is like me.
I don't know if it was for me at first. I remember first seeing somebody I knew there and nearly crapping myself. And it took a bit to realise that if somebody else is here, either they are or they're with a good friend who is. So you don't need to panic.
That's right.
Euphoria, I guess maybe that was about the second or third time. But stunned amazement too. I mean, from having been in a relationship for a couple of years, more than, but to then have it in front of me in anything other than my own mirror, in my own four walls, to see expression of it in not as broad a range as you see now, but certainly a broader range than those stereotypical portrayals that I'd had growing up, was amazing and just a jaw-dropping experience. So eventually euphoric, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I remember circling and circling and circling, thinking, but if I go in, what if someone I know or someone who knows me somehow sees me going into that club or that bar? And it was like, eventually I just had to tell myself, just for goodness sake, just get in there and do it. So it was.
But you would have had that extra layer of the illegality of things.
Correct. Yeah.
And the illegal or not, I mean, there was still so much negativity and raids and whatever.
So, Fran, we talked about the kind of the feeling, the memory of going to our first gay or lesbian club or bar or pub. Are there still lesbian clubs or safe spaces in a big city like Melbourne, or not so much?
Club 397, or as it used to be called, the Boulevard. Boulevard on Swanston Street was where I first went. What's out there now? I don't really know. Certainly over the years of coming back from living in London, whatever it was, sort of late 80s, for a while beyond, there were certainly more options. And I know that there are options now, but I couldn't tell you what they are. I've been in a relationship for 16 years now, and we don't tend to go out to really any gay clubs, lesbian places, spaces, whatever. So yes, anecdotally, I believe there are.
So
it's interesting because what's become more important to me as I get older, and as my sexuality is just less of an issue, is that while it's still a core part of me and indeed us, my partner and I, finding our people is more about our ethics and values and the left-leaning side of things rather than sexuality. Because it's not an issue with the people who are our friends, some of whom, certainly still many of whom are lesbians, but whether they are or aren't it's just one area of similarity. And so that, and the whole going out clubbing thing is not something that we do straight or otherwise. So but yes, I'm happy to report that I believe there are a range of options now for and not just gay and lesbian clubs, but inclusive places where it doesn't matter and it's not an issue. And the whole new notion of queerness and a range of sexualities and gender identity and expression and whatnot are just still in many places a problem, but in many places it's just part of that sort of, alt crowd or whatever.
I think that's right. I think as we get older, we choose our tribe, and sexuality may be one of the filters through which we choose our tribe, but it's not as crucial.
It's not the main one, and it certainly was when I was in my 20s.
No, it's
definitely,
as you said, it comes down to more about values and ethics and do I actually like this person rather than whether they're LGBTIQ plus or not, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like for us, we're busy with life and boring things that people in their mid to late 50s do, like house stuff and garden stuff, and we also foster kids and walk the dog and
so
other
that old thing they used to call
it. Sorry, Rodney.
Oh, that old thing they used to call the gay agenda is pretty much anyone's agenda, right? Like lifestyle.
And there are still battles to be fought. There are still there's still a long way to go, even when you look at the vast change in levels of acceptance and also just stuff like, you can't do or say those sorts of things at work anymore that used to be commonplace, the homophobic jokes or snide remarks or whatever. So at least in a lot of places you can just that doesn't happen anymore and it can't happen and don't. But certainly there's a broader acceptance and but still a long way to go, and
it feels like we've
plenty to still fight for.
Oh, I think so too. I think it feels like we've come a long way since almost 5 years ago when marriage equality became law in Australia, but and so many things have shifted in that short time. But I still think there are some things, particularly for trans and gender diversity.
Oh, massively. The marriage equality thing, if I can just sort of tangent for a second, it was interesting. My partner and I said around that whole time of, for some reason, the government decided that randoms had to vote on our rights for equality, and it was marriage equality. It wasn't even it wasn't gay equality or same-sex equality. It was marriage equality. And the fact that it had to be voted on by randoms, isn't that why we elected a government? All the everything pointed to the fact that most people went, whatevs. But apparently on that issue, they had to check with the entire Australian population. We said to each other something on the lines of, I feel sorry for young gay people starting to question their sexuality or address their sexuality, kids who have rainbow families who are old enough to understand the debate and the hatred that was out there. And we said, we're fine, we're a couple of tough old dykes, we're okay. And we weren't. It impacted us, and it was unexpected, and it was hard, and it was heartbreaking, and we came through it fine, and thank goodness we got the yes vote. But I remember asking my mum, the aforementioned very strong Christian, and also my brother, one of the six of us, the one who has followed in that Christian path, and saying independently to each of them, how are you going to vote? And both my mum and my brother came back with very similar answers, which was, I'm not sure yet.
Wow.
I'm reading, thinking, praying, etc. about it. And I was glad that neither of them just said, well, look, sorry, but I'm going to be voting no. Unfortunately, both of them and my sister-in-law did vote no, but I appreciated the fact that they at least thought about it. But yeah, it was an interesting time, and I hope I don't have to go through anything like that again. And it's so minor compared to what so many people in so many countries and cultures have to go through. But it was a horrible, divisive, hateful, unnecessary time. And having spoken at a little bit of length with my sister-in-law in particular after that, she hadn't realised, had never thought how hurtful it would be to us. And she apologised. Now, she may still vote no tomorrow if the same thing happened, but I wanted her to know how it did impact not only on those people who we'd seen as probably more vulnerable in that situation, but on those of us who are strong and safe and secure in our identity and have safe jobs and family networks and friendship networks and all of that.
That period of time gave the Australian people the license to be hateful and to be hurtful without necessarily, without necessarily being educated about the impact that it was going to have on all sorts of LGBTI.
Without necessarily being educated on a lot of levels, Bronte.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But it did give them license. You're quite right.
So you mentioned that your employer, Tobin Brothers, are pretty inclusive, and there's a variety of LGBTIQ plus people working there.
Oh, it's not about a variety. There's a heap of gay guys, and there's me.
There we are.
There's well, maybe two, but there's several. There are several gay guys who work, who are all out and fine.
Yep.
And also, there have been in the past some female staff members who've brought a girlfriend, as in a friend girl, not my kind of girlfriend along to something like a Christmas party because, hey, it's U+1. Guys don't do that. Straight guys don't do that. And certainly the gay guys who have been partnered, which probably most of them are at work, have also always brought along the partner. Like it's not an issue. Or it might be for some individuals, but it's not an issue. You and your partner. And it's fine.
Yeah. Are there other things that that your employer does, or you've seen other employers do, that kind of ramp up the inclusion measure?
I guess one of the things, I don't know about other employers because I haven't worked for anybody else for so many years, but one of the things that I did some years ago was look at our policy document and go through and suggest some changes to do with things like maternity leave and changing things to primary parent and secondary parent, and also including provision for adoptive parents, and because we're talking a company that employs a couple of hundred people. We're not talking a massive place that has lawyers writing documents and whatever. So I just went through and said, what about adoptive parents? What about foster parents not in our situation, but taking on permanent care? Those types of things to make it more inclusive. And also on the gender equality stuff, there used to be a note on our uniform policy that the guys couldn't wear earrings. And I said, can't say that anymore. So just going through and tidying up some of those things. And all of the things that I emailed in were changed.
Wow.
There's no question about it, or do we have to, and how far do we have to go with this? But just no problem, of course. And it was very much a of course. Yes. And another interesting thing I noticed recently, we have a template into which we put our name of the deceased and where we are and whatever, to then have a welcome done by the funeral director that basically says, hello, sit down, shut up, turn your phones off, you're here for the funeral, thanks very much. The service today is being led by celebrant Bronte Price, or Father bloody blah, or whatever it might be. And that document is one of those, I don't know, the techo jargon, but you put in the gumph and it prints out on your screen, and then it becomes a free-form document that you can change in whatever way. And it's also just a bit of a guide. I mean, I always franize it a bit, but the document that was produced always said, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to Tobin Brothers blah blah chapel for the funeral service today for blah blah. And not that long ago, I noticed that in printing it out, now my shame, I didn't do anything about it, but I noticed that it printed out with, we welcome you today.
Yes.
And I went, where's the ladies and gentlemen?
Yes.
Hey. And I spoke to our HR manager, who is a straight cis female, a bit older than me, I guess, and whatevs. And I said, who changed it? And she said, I did. I think she noticed, or somebody had said something, or quite possibly I think she said that she had actually just gone, hang on, how come this says ladies and gentlemen? And so she just took it out.
Wow.
And now she didn't have to run it by anybody or check that this was okay to take out something in a conservative industry that it has always been. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And she just took it out.
Fantastic.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people still get up there and say ladies and gentlemen because they just say it how they always have. But it was a tangible change in that strive towards inclusivity. What else have I seen? I don't know. It's just there certainly is a feeling there of being an inclusive workplace. We've had, as I said before, it's seen by many to be, because it was set up by four brothers as in siblings, not as in religious brothers, Irish Catholic, 88 years ago.
Wow.
And still seen by many as the Catholic funeral director. And I'm sure we would do a greater percentage of Catholic funerals than a lot of other companies. But we do a stack of services. We do Hindu services. We do quite a few Baha'i services. We do Jewish services. We do very few Islamic ones, but a few. They tend more to go direct to the mosque, etc., and an increasing number of civil services, most definitely. But the different religions and whatnot have always been embraced in that sense of providing a service. But we've also had Muslim colleagues,
of
and
course,
the other. It does, I guess, still tend to attract a certain type of person.
Yes.
and you know, we're not out there advertising in the gay media for staff yet, but certainly, you know, there's not a problem in terms of ethnicity and stuff.
No.
I think it's a sort of industry that would be slow to overtly embrace somebody perhaps non-binary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And
I think that the steps don't always have to be kind of jumping from one mountain to another, massive steps. They can be tiny little steps, like the getting rid of ladies and gentlemen. It's a tiny step, but it's completely in the right direction. And
even things like my haircut.
Yeah.
I first cut it like this, and I've had recently-ish, you know, long down there, ponytail, girly hairstyles. I'm not particularly girly, but the first time that I cut it this short, I'd sometimes toyed with the idea, or not toyed with the idea, but thought, oh, I'd like to do the shave for a cure, but you know, couldn't do that at work. And then one year, I'm going to guess like 5-6 years ago, an email came out saying, oh, you know, we're going to do this. We had at the time a few staff who either had cancer or had a partner or spouse with cancer. And there was a desire by management to say, let's do something concrete about this. Let's do this as a workplace and have a day and evening, whatever it was, where we can come together and, you know, we'll have a few other fundraising things going and bring your family and the people who are doing the shave can get it done there and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Me being a bit of a smart aleck went, yes, thank you very much, thinking, yeah, right. They'll say, sure, but it has to be, you know, like just a short haircut or a colour or whatever the other options are. And the email came back going, no worries, blah, 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 blah. And I went, ooh, wow. Serves me right. I duly went and got a number 2 haircut. Wow. And I said a few days before that, I said to one of the senior managers, straight woman, I said, when I've had the, you know, this is coming up on Friday night or whatever it was, when I've had that for at least a few weeks after that, do you want to put me in the role, because I do a split role, do you want me to put me in a role where I am meeting with families and doing funeral arrangements rather than the upfront person for a funeral, be that at a Catholic mass or civil service or whatever, because I can go, you know, hello, I'm Fran, I've just done the shave for a cure. And she just said, we don't explain the male staff's short haircuts. Why would we have to explain yours?
There we are.
And I went, yeah, you're right. And so such was the case when I did that. And then a few years later, I did it again and dashed out and did the number 1. And this has just been a for fun one. And I've just done this today. Thank you very much. My newly acquired skill of doing my 1.5 length cut, because I'm quite enjoying it. And also because I got it done a few months ago, foolishly at the start of winter, and thought, well, now that I've done that, I'm going to keep it through summer.
Yes.
But it's not, to my understanding, it's not been an issue. And I'm quite certain if anybody did write in and go, oh, that person, very unprofessional, how do you have it? They would just ignore it or shut that down very quickly. So just even on things like that.
Yeah.
You know.
They are small steps, but they're really important steps, aren't they?
Yeah.
I want to go back quickly to your coming out period and just wonder when you came out to yourself and then to family, what sort of impact did that have on your mental health? Was that a positive impact? Did you feel some sense of relief, or what was going on in your head?
Bit of both. It as in positive and negative. Yes, it was a relief, but it took me a long time to move from, oh goodness, this is a thing for me / us in this situation now, to, oh, I guess I am, to, okay, I'm all right with that, to being perfectly fine. So it was a process of many years, and partly because of societal expectations and whatnot. But and certainly it's been 30 years now that I just whatever. But yeah, yes, there was a measure of relief, but it's interesting, having abandoned my Christian faith, I suppose, that I had, or whatever it was growing up, the following of that, having left that, there's still, it's not quite like what a lot of Catholics and Anglicans have, with that really inherent guilt about anything that they should or shouldn't be guilty about. But there's still a measure of that. It's probably less guilt than a sadness about the fact that I knew that my parents would never, they accept me, and they always have accepted me, and it took a while to get beyond the okay, don't tell the children, being my younger siblings, to, if there's a family thing, just saying, oh, it's Dad's birthday on Monday, we're going to have a family lunch on Sunday, can you come, blah 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 blah, without having to ever say you plural or you and partner. It was just, if I was being invited, if they were ringing up to invite you was plural. It was just an expectation. And it would have been let me just think for a minute. Got post-COVID brain, and it's affected my maths ability. 2007 was Mum and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And Mum's never been fussed. She's very Germanic. She's not fussed about birthdays. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, sorry, I can't make it on the day. Oh, whatever. But this was a really important deal to her and to Dad. And so, of course, we all traipsed along to church before, and then we had the morning tea afterwards. And that was very much a, can you come? And of course it was my partner and I who went, and that was who was expected. And I think Mum long ago gave up sort of trying to introduce, this is Fran and her friend, and just knows that I'll say, oh, I'm Lorraine's daughter Fran, and this is my partner, blah blah, and just knows that that's part of it. And
so it kind of normalizes it, doesn't it? It's just as with any straight couple, it's just
and look, Mum and Dad's ideal was always that we would be Christians. The fact that my oldest brother lived in sin with his now wife before they married, not ideal. The fact that I was living in sin with a female partner, not ideal. But it was less important than the fact that they wanted all their kids to be Christians. So it's kind of like, whatever. If you just become a Christian, the rest will sort itself out. Not too sure how I guess they envisaged it sort itself out by me being straight. But I remember when I split with a partner of 11 years, 20 odd years ago, over 20 years ago. And Mum and Dad were really upset for me. And they were upset and sad for me, sad for us, because they saw that we saw it as a marriage. And so that marriage of the hearts had broken down, and they were really sad for that, for me and for my ex-partner. So you get, I certainly have had that acceptance of me, of us.
That's right.
Just not of it. And a gradually increasing, I suppose, understanding of things and whatever. But I accept that they, or now just Mum, will never really accept it. And Mum perhaps hasn't quite accepted that I'll never become a Christian. You know, they and now she prays for her kids every day that we'd find the Lord. And I respect her and when Dad was alive, their Christianity, in the sense that they were serious about it and it informed their life at what they weren't Sunday Christians. And I think, well, you know, it's not like they're going, oh, well, it's wrong because the Bible says it's wrong, and they don't follow anything else.
No.
They genuinely have read stuff from places like Metropolitan Community Church and you know, from a Christian perspective of accepting homosexuality. And they've read and educated themselves, I suppose, and prayed about it, because that's what they do. Now, they still don't think it's the right thing or God's plan for people. And, you know, I don't think
sometimes
God's plan for people to be homophobic assholes like the old, going back to the old days, the old Reverend Fred Nile and Margaret Court and, you know, and I still loved my parents, loved my mum, and loved them as well. And just different on some fundamental things, and we
That's right.
agree to disagree.
But they surprise us in some ways, I think, our parents. And they at first possibly struggle to understand. They might read, they might certainly have conversations with friends and other relatives, but they
don't think they do. Oh no, I don't think they do have conversation with friends or other relatives. I think it's a bit like, oh, don't mention that. Even though, you know, their friends and relatives do know, because
of course,
once or twice a year when I rock up to church, you know, it's not ever something that I hide. And things like the 50th anniversary, you know, I bring my partner. So
no, that's right.
I can't ignore it anymore.
If you were to give some of, like, we know that there are people of all ages who live at least part, if not all, of their life in the closet, and for many people, it's just really difficult, if not impossible, for a range of reasons, to ever come out. What advice would you give to a person who's perhaps, you know, late teens, early 20s, questioning their sexuality and or gender identity? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yes, it can be hard, and there are circumstances in which I can't necessarily even relate to, where it might be hard or impossible due to particularly family cultural differences and religious differences, and very, very strong expectations of fulfilling an expected sexuality, fulfilling an assigned gender, that type of stuff. I guess the main thing I'd say would be, at least be true to yourself, even if you need to separate things and not have that merging of family and yourself, family as in your family of birth. But come out to yourself, at least have chosen family, have people who you can be yourself with. If you can, though, even if you're a little bit worried, work out your priorities. And for me, I think my biggest priority is that in my home, that I'm me. And so anybody who comes into my home has to accept that my home is our home. That's and that we are a couple and we are a family, and that we as a couple, a same-sex couple, foster kids. We do, you know, whatever we do, most of what we do is very boring and normal. But the joy, I suppose, of living an integrated life, of living a life that's true to yourself, and I can only imagine what that's like for people who are trans or gender queering or non-binary or you know, identifying in different ways. But to be true to yourself, I can't imagine not being. And if you lose somebody, friends, family, whatever, because of that, then I they may, I was about to say something that made me think of, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was, because for me, it certainly has been, and I cannot imagine living an inauthentic life in that sense. You'll make friends and family, you'll have your chosen family.
Yeah.
Just be you, whatever that is, and people will accept you or not.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then that classic saying of it's their loss.
Yeah.
And many people who think that family will struggle. I had a friend who, very conservative, very small town country, was like, oh, I can't lose my family. I can't lose my family. I can't lose my family. And her chosen her birth family is still incredibly important to her. And when she was in a situation where she did finally, through circumstances, decide that she had to come out,
yeah,
it was fine.
Yeah.
The very country woman who'd go to the footy games and yell out, "You flopping, lop-eared poofter," at the opposition, was very quickly very fine, and all the rest of the family have been very fine. And she's now got kids that she's had with one with her ex-partner and two others more recently, in same-sex relationships, and they're just part of the family. And so, yes, sometimes you'll know that this will be the end of a relationship with your birth family or parts thereof, but sometimes you'll think it might be, and you're the most important. Be true to you, but give it a crack.
That's it. And also access the myriad of resources that are out there for queer people now, like so much.
Absolutely. So many, whether it's a support group, whether it's switchboard, whether it's whatever. There are so many places to turn to for help and support, and quite honestly, if you just look around, you'll probably find somebody else at your work, in your street, whatever. Who, just because they're gay doesn't mean they're going to be a good support person for you, or automatically a friend. But be you. You be you, because being you is wonderful.
Thank you. I've enjoyed our chat, Fran. Thanks so much.
I've enjoyed it enormously, Bronte. And if anybody watches this and actually gets through to the end, good on you. The code word for a prize is Freddo Frog. I'd love to think that some people might actually, even in segments, get through all of this and live your life, be you, and my, how things have changed, and long may they continue to do so. Thanks, Bronte, for everything that you're doing for our community.
Thank you. Ta.